We live in a paradoxical society. On one hand, we abhor violence and violent images, yet we view and consume violent images at a more rapid rate than any other form of media. Whether it's in movies, on TV, or the evening news, we are a culture obsessed with violence. Yet, we are also a society obsessed with the nuanced idea of peace. We detest violence when it happens. We mourn those who lost their lives in the Orlando Pulse shooting. We empathize with the parents who lost their children at Sandy Hook. We protest the injustice of police officers killing innocent civilians. We hate violence, yet we consume it like rabid dogs. With social media, circulating images of violence has become a way for us to memorialize or pay homage to the victims. When acts of violence and terrorism happen, we see circulating these images as a way to bear witness or to vow to not let it happen again. It should be stated that by circulating, I mean to share, like, retweet, or favorite an image. Basically, any way that you would take an image and allow for more people to see it. Yet we see horrific acts of violence continuing on around us. It is clear that merely circulating images is not enough for us to end the act of violence. The danger in simplifying the circulation of images is that it can lead to misinterpretation and people forcing their own cultural logic on it. It is easy to see how our media's addiction to the acts of trauma and violence supersede our ability to understand when images are being used and manipulated for political gain. To dive into this theory, I will examine one of the most heroic and controversial stories of the 21st century, the shooting and incredible recovery of Malala Yousafzai. On October 9, 2012, Malala rose to international acclaim when a member of the Taliban shot her on her way to school. In the days and weeks that followed, she received thousands of well wishes from citizens across the world. Open candlelight vigils were held, hashtags were tweeted, and the world seemed to come together to pray and hope for the recovery of this teenage girl. Malala was targeted because she was a young, outspoken advocate for women's education. Prior to her attack, Malala attended a school that her father, Zauddin Yousafzai, had founded. When the Taliban took control over her hometown of Mingora, Pakistan, and started to attack girls' schools, Malala began to take action. In September of 2008, she gave a speech entitled, "How Dare the Taliban Take Away My Basic Right to Education?" In 2009, she began blogging for the BBC under the pseudonym Gal Makai. Her identity would soon be revealed in a New York Times documentary, Class Dismissed: The Death of Female Education. The documentary follows Malala's struggle to keep up her education amid Taliban attempts to close all girls' schools in the area. When it broadcast on the New York Times website, it brought Malala to the world's attention. Once her identity was revealed, she used her newfound platform to speak on the universal right of women's education. This ultimately led to her being nominated for the International Children's Peace Prize and winning Pakistan's National Youth Peace Prize in 2011. As publicity around Malala activism grew, the Taliban issued a death threat against her. But both her and her parents never thought the fundamentalist group would actually harm a child. Fast forward to the shooting, which left Malala in critical condition. She was flown to a military hospital in Peshawar, where a portion of her skull was removed to treat her swelling brain. She was then transferred to a hospital in Birmingham, England, where she stayed after her recovery. Miraculously, she suffered no major brain damage and was able to attend school just 5 months after her attack. Although she suffered no brain damage, Malala had to undergo a series of surgeries, which left her face permanently scarred. Anyone who sees her is instantly confronted with the reality of her attack. She not only becomes a hero, but also a walking spectacle. The horrors of her attack are undeniable. Her image has been widely circulated around the world and has become synonymous with peace and the global fight for education. To some, she has been considered a pseudo-martyr for the cause of education equality. To others, she is considered a traitor, a puppet used by the West for political gain. Indeed, there couldn't be a more perfect narrative to fit the West's depiction of the Middle East as being barbaric and backwards than that of the shooting of a 15-year-old girl on her way to school. According to the Tribune, the Pakistani Taliban released a statement claiming that the reason she was targeted was not because of her activism, but rather her speaking against the Taliban. The issue is not so much with Malala herself as it is with what people want or have molded her to be. While Malala's story is heartbreaking, her story does not represent every woman's journey towards education. The truth is, there are hundreds and thousands of other Malalas. They come from Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other places in the world. Painted her to be, as former politician and newspaper editor Humara Alwiz Shahid states, an American stooge who was interfering with domestic politics and criticizing conservative Islamic tradition, stuck in this war of what Pakistan is and what the West wants to project at Pakistan. Malala suffers. The way the West projects it, it damages the victim. The West wants to gain from Malala's real story, an agenda that suits them or the policies they want. Herein lies the issue with creating symbols out of humans or violent attacks. It is not only wrong, but impossible to create a one-dimensional narrative from a multi-dimensional human being or tragic event. Just saying that the Taliban, or worse, Islam, tried to kill Malala is a vastly oversimplified statement that excludes much of the story. It paints the picture that the West saved Malala when, in actuality, one can see how the policies and occupation of Afghanistan by the West ultimately led to the destabilization of the region, thus leading to the formation of the Taliban, who ultimately shot Malala. This narrative also denies Malala the right to embrace a faith she loves and has practiced her whole life. She has openly stated multiple times that Islam is a religion of peace and understanding, that the issue lies in the powerful men who misuse and twist the teachings of Islam and scripture in the Quran for their own benefit. Still, politicians use her image and likeness to justify the use of drones to take out the Taliban, which result in the deaths of the hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. This contributes to the never-ending cycle of violence that has been plaguing the region for decades. Only viewing Malala as just a victim also takes away the ability to view her holistically. Each of us is more than the single worst thing to happen to us. A cancer patient is not defined at the end of his or her life as just being a cancer patient. Simply viewing Malala as a victim removes the profound humanitarian work she has done for women, children, and refugee rights, some of which she was doing way before her attack. I believe that pegging her as a victim only serves to promote the hegemony between the East and the West, with the East being painted as barbarians and the West being projected as saviors. I believe the biggest triumph in Malala's story is how much of her narrative she has reclaimed. Although audiences and governments try to constrain her into a simple notion of what a young woman or feminist should be, she has reclaimed her story and chooses to act on her own terms. Therefore, she opts to wear the traditional hijab, speak out against oppressive governments, and obey her father. She complicates what we may perceive a feminist to be and challenges us to think beyond our own locus of logic. When we work towards the empowerment of women and girls across the world, we must do so in a way that still honors their culture and identity. If we promote a one-sided narrative of how a woman should or ought to act or be treated, we could be doing incredible damage. Malala is a hero, but she is a hero with her own story and her own narrative, and her attack should not be used to validate the very violence she is trying to end, and simply circulating these images of violence only serves to promote a one-sided narrative that excludes the very person who is trying to end the violence.